So we can now start shading our building. We'll do a first pass of shading with a base shading, and then we'll play with texture painting. That will cut this part in two, so that it will be more appealing to get a first result, and then just add a few details and some more variation to our model. I will just smooth the shading here and switch to the second layer. Here what I want is just to add an empty, so I will place it here, empty, plain axe, and I will call it rocks empty, and I will parent those rocks to it. Because we will separate them all, this will help us to have a nice outliner, so Ctrl P, object. Now I can enter edit mode and press P to separate all my brick by loose part. And I do so that we'll be able to use the random node and have some color variation on each brick. Instead of using texture, we'll be able to use a simple node and have a slight color variation that will bring some nice information. So I will let Blender calculate this. So it took a few minutes to calculate this. I can get out of edit mode, and with all selected, press Ctrl Alt Shift C, origin to geometry. So now all of our brick have their origin inside the median point of their geometry. I will uncheck the relationship lines here, which make the scene a bit messy, and I will repeat the process with those tiles. So let's add here an empty. I will move it there and call it tiles empty. I will parent them to it, object, go into edit mode, with all selected, press P by loose parts. Also for those, I will get out of edit mode, press Ctrl Alt Shift C, origin to geometry. Now if I move this, everything follows. For the wooden part, I don't think we need to give it color variation, so I will keep it as a simple object. So let's try shading first our rocks here. So to lighten this scene, we'll mainly use an HDRI. So I've added free HDRI to this tutorial so that we can test different kind of lighting. But I believe we'll choose the one that is the closest to this atmosphere. To test our HDRI, I will add a simple UV sphere, and I will subdivide it once. That's gonna be enough. I will push the simplify to 1 so that I can see the difference, and I will smooth it and add it a shader with a glossy BSDF with a roughness of 0, and this is going to be our mirror ball. This is going to be useful to see how our shader react and our HDRI reacts actually. So I press 0 here and start rendering this area. Now I can open the node editor and switch here to world and click use nodes. Now with the node wrangler I can press Ctrl T and open one of the HDR map we have. So I believe the parking will be a good one because it's quite cloudy and the ground on its HDR is gray as our canyon here. So we have a nice directional lighting. We can see the ground reflecting grayish color here, which will fit our background. So we can start with this. We can change the orientation of the HDR by changing the Z rotation here. And if you check the mirror ball, you can see the sun rolling. So for the time being, the light is coming from the back, while in our scene it's coming like this. So I need to make it rotate so that the sun came somewhere like that. Now I can see my shadows projected quite as the reference. So we won't be playing for the time being with more advanced features of environment lighting. Using the HDR is a good way, because if I open this in the UV image editor and source my HDR, you can see here in the bottom the value of the color. And you can see that for this bright color here, I have a value of 2.1, while here I'm at 0.4, etc. And this is how HDR works, is that instead of having a value that goes from 0 to 1, we have an higher range of definition for the value of our color, meaning that this will currently emit a lot more lightning than that. If you use a simple JPEG, you won't have this result. So let's now try shading our rock. I will select one and switch to the node editor. Now we can click Object instead of Word, and here's what we had before. So I will get rid of everything but the diffuse, and I will Ctrl-Shift-click it to plug it in, and we already have a very interesting look here. And let's press Ctrl-T to add a texture setup to it. So it turns to purplish or pinky because Blender can't find any map, but we can open our maps, and we'll start with our rock dirty. And now we can see our dirt map onto our rocks, and it already looks really awesome. I'm really happy about the result. So let's load the other maps. I will open here the normal map. I will disable the rendering so that it loads a little faster. Let's load the AO. And finally, I don't remember if we have any other map, the displacements. Okay, so I will just move the normal here, and we can give a label to our nodes here. So let's label it rock normal, and let's give it a purplish color so that we can easily identify it as the normal. By default, if I don't plug any texture coordinates into this, Blender will use the selected and renderable UVs selected in the mesh. So for this, we don't need those, as we won't be rescaling the mapping. We can just set it like that. I will add my normal map. And a very important thing is to switch here to non-color data, or it will turn buggy. I will show it to you with a shader, glossy shader. So this is our rock without any influence. If I let it to color here and plug the normal map, you can see that the result is really strange. Why? While if I turn to non-color data, now I have a more expectable result. We can then change the influence from 0 to whatever we want. So let's try 0.8 for example, for a more subtle result. And here we are with our sculpting normals. So I can plug this into the diffuse BSDF, and see how it looks. And it looks quite nice here. So this is our dirt map. We can name it So now let's see if we can give some color to our stones. So instead of using a simple dirt map here, I will add a color mix RGB, and we can use the dirt map as a factor for those two colors. Or we can overlay the dirt map onto a color. And to get to this color, what we can do is add an input object information here and check what we have with the random. And here you have a different color for each stone, which is very interesting. So now if I duplicate this and use this random information as a factor, I can add two brownish color, for example. And now I have color variation through all my stones. So you can use the factor to mix two different colors, or eventually to mix a value in the hue and saturation with the hue and saturation node. So I prefer to have a slightly bluish stone here. And now I can overlay my dirt map here, overlay, and we get this nice color variation that we can plug into the diffuse. And that looks really, really nice. Now, if we want to add some contrast into those crevices here, we can multiply the AO. So let's duplicate this, plug it in here and set it to multiply, and then plug in the AO. So here I have my AO influence. If I press M to mute the node here, I can see it without. So this is quite subtle, but that's fine. And finally we have our displacement, which I generally like to overlay upon it. So we can duplicate this one, plug it before. I'm trying to organize already my map so that it's pretty simple. So here we have the influence of the displacement, and we can see darkening the stone, but also highlighting some of the areas that are bumped out. So that looks really nice. So now we get this result. So our stone may look a bit dark for the time being. Let's check our reference, and it also does here, but he's more into a brownish and greenish color. So I will try to fit this by opening the node editor. I will open here the UV image editor, and I can switch this to something more brownish. You can play with the color, and I believe I may change it later on, because the variation here is quite violent. We could also use a color ramp instead, so I will do this color ramp, because it will allow us to add more colors. So let's try brownish gray. So let's check our values. 0.5, I will set it to 0.5 nearly everywhere. And I will plug this here and get rid of this one. So it might need to have an highest value. We can then add a color RGB curve and slightly push the colors up like that. Fine. Using our own map, we get to this result. Now we can add another map, but we need to get a full texture setup. So I will uncheck this and press Ctrl T to save time and move this back there. Then I will plug this again there. And now we can open in the maps CG textures this seamless map. So I want to point something out, is that usually CG texture doesn't allow to distribute their product, and they were kind enough to allow me to use their maps and to link them and distribute them with this course. So I truly encourage you to go on textures.com and create an account. It's totally free and you will be able to download textures every day. So that's really a must-have for a CG artist. So here we have this nice seamless texture, and instead of using our UVs, even if we can't really see here our UVs, we will use generated coordinates, and we will ask Blender to use a box projection. As we are working on square shape, you can see that it already works pretty fine. We can also, if we have some seams, apply some blending like 0.3. And here what I want is just to have a natural pattern of material here, of how to say it, of rock. So it's kind of small for the time being and look repetitive, so I will reduce the scale to 0.5, which will make the texture appearing bigger. And we can then try different mixing method here. So let's try to multiply it first onto our color, our previous color, and see how it looks. So for the time being it looks quite dark, but we have those variations that are really interesting. Let's check on our diffuse shader how it looks. So it really darkens our stone. Let's try overlay instead. And I do prefer the result. And you can see, even if we have this pattern that appears pretty easily when we check the map, once overlaid to what we have created, we have enough variation so that our eyes are, you can't really feel like, okay, there are too much pattern that are repeated here. So I will just put the overlay here and plug it into our curve just before, so that we can correct our color. So for the time being, this will be our base color. So we can frame those to have a nice organization. So let's clean up our node setup here. We can press Shift Ctrl H, sorry, to get rid of the node we are not using. Pressing Alt Ctrl H again will reset them. Then we can reduce this and move it there. But for the time being, we can frame this. Press the T key, go to Node Wrangler, and frame selected. It will create a frame around all those nodes that we can easily move and label, like base color. Now I can give this a color like brownish, so that it reminds us the color we're using here, and increase the label size so that it's easy to find. Now that we have done this, I will just add a vector bump, and to combine a normal map and a bump map, which will be sourcing this, so I can already plug this as the 8th of the bump map and add a glossy shader to check what's happening here. So if I plug here into the normal, I can see the influence of the texture converted to a bump map. So generally I use a strength of 0.1, that's enough. Maybe 0.2 here. Okay, 0.1 was fine, I think 0.50. And to combine it with our normal map, we just need to plug the normal into the normal of the bump. And now I have both the influence of my normal map and the bump map, which is what we were looking for. So let's plug this here. Let's now plug this here. And let's now add some glossiness to those stones. So we have this glossy BSDF shader here. We'll need to play with the layer weight and the Fresnel effect, and to set its value upon the diffuse, and also to set the roughness. So this is a quite important thing because it gives a lot of variation. So let's first play with the roughness. What I will source to change the roughness value here will be dirt map information, making the darkest area which are in the creases, so which have more dust, to be like more rough, while those edges which are mostly exposed to the rain, for example, will be with a roughness value that will be lower. So generally I use precise values, but we can simply play with a color ramp. So to mix two values, instead of using a mixed value node, we can use a mixed color. The problem here is that we can't use those colors as they are, or we'll have to set the value for each RGB model here. So to create a mixed value node, what we can do is press Ctrl G here, and it will create a group node. Now I can unplug those, and in the option here, get rid of this one and this one, and add new slot that we can call value, and it doesn't matter how you call them, and value. And the output won't be a color anymore, but a value also. And now I can plug the value here, this value here, and this one there. Press tab to get out of the group. Call this mixed value, and also call the node group mixed value. And now I can find, when I add a new node in group, this mixed value node. And this will allow us to set only one value to drive our whatever we want, because we'll be using this a lot. So I want to use the displacement. So we can duplicate it and remove it from the frame by pressing Alt P. And now I can move it outward. So this is the displacement, and I was looking for our dirt map. Alt P and move it here. So this is going to be one factor for our roughness. So for the time being, I will set the roughness to 0, from 0 to 1, and put it in the roughness of our glossy so that it will be obvious what's happening. I will also play with the input layer weight, which work as the Fresnel, and we also have the Fresnel option here, but I prefer the facing option. That's really a matter of personal taste here. And then with a converter color ramp, we'll be able to change its influence. So I will switch to B-spline. And as I want to have at least the influence of my normals onto this, I can plug the output of the bump there. And now I can see my grainy shape. So this is going to be our basic Fresnel effect. We have here our dot map driving this. And I will try to plug now this color into it to replace so that you can see the difference. So where it's dark, the roughness value will be 0, so it will be mirror-like. So the facing area like this to the camera will be really sharp, while those will be pretty rough, which we don't want. We want the invert. The more a face is pointing at you, the less glossy and sharp it will be. So what we can do is invert those two flags, or simply invert our values here. 1 and 0. Because the value of 1 is way too strong. So let's reduce this to 0.2, for example. And we can then overlay our dot map upon this. Shift A, color, mix RGB. We'll switch to overlay and increase its influence to the maximum. So maybe we can invert those and overlay color ramp. Yeah, that looks way better, way like I wanted it to look like. So let's now check our roughness here. Let's also use this map to drive the roughness. We will simply multiply those or overlay it also, as it has white and dark value. So this is pretty arbitrary, but I just want to get nice contrast. So I will just add a color, the converter color ramp just before. Let's plug our seamless texture here. Alright, and let's increase the contrast a lot. Maybe invert those. Yeah, something like this. Now I can reduce the influence. Multiply maybe. Yeah, that's what I wanted. Those nice black area and a lot of variation in the color here. So now we should get something we can play with. Let's slightly increase this value to 0.08, for example, and this to 0.6, and maybe add another color ramp just after our mixing result here. Maybe the highest value is a bit too strong, 0.3 maybe. It's gonna be cool. Alright, now let's mix this with our diffuse, which is there. So this is going to be here our roughness map, and this is also what will drive the mixing between the two, but I will need to duplicate this one, Shift D, plug the result, and we'll change the value. Now here we can add a shader, mix shader. We'll put the glossy in the bottom and the diffuse on top of it. Now we'll use this as a factor, so let's check how it looks. I want to have a better influence on those edges, so the glossiest one. So for the edges, for the facing, values here, let's try to use a value of 0.15, which will be enough, I think. 0.3 for the edges, okay? Now let's see how it looks. So it's a bit too shiny for me. Maybe I can change my angle. Yeah, it's a bit too shiny. It looks like plastic also. So I believe the roughness value is a bit too low here. Let's try 0.12, which will make the glossiness duller, and I think it's quite better. And here for the main influence I will reduce it to 0.1 and 0.2 for the second. Now I think it looks a bit more natural. By simply using our texture, we get to this nice result. And now we just need to plug our normals here into our glossy BSDF to get its influence, and you see that it really changed the result with and without. Here it looks flat, and here we really get those sharp edges. So if I maximize the view, you can see this very nice result and stone shading. So let's do a little cleanup here. Let's frame those together. Normals and bump. This is our glossiness influence, so let's frame it also. So now we have a better node tree, and we will simply copy this to create our tile shader, because these are made also of kind of a stone, so this is going to be quite the same, but we will just change the pattern on it and change the base color for sure, and change the glossy influence, but everything is relevant. So I will copy it, switch to the 3D view, select the tile, one at least, go into the node editor, get rid of everything but the the node output, and press Ctrl V and Ctrl Shift to click this. So if we had the preview there, it will turn to be buggy because this doesn't share the same UVs as the other, but we should have a result at last. So now we just need to replace the different textures. So here our dirt map, let's source our tile dirty and do the same for the others. So now we can replace our former map with this metal bear map. So I'm using metallic texture. Doesn't really matter what kind of product you're using. What matters is that the patterns is great. And here we have a map with a smoother surface, which will fit our object a little betterly. So if I now check how it looks out of the box here, that looks quite nice. Maybe we can increase the scale to 1. Let's see, to have a smaller pattern here, and also maybe reduce its influence a little. Now I will check on the diffuse how it looks, or even on our wall shader. And I like the fact that we just have some graininess on the surface, but not something too strong. Now I will go up to this main roof to change the color, because here we are using the same color as our rock, and on the reference we are more on bluish tone and gray tone. So I will slightly modify it, and you can see here the influence of the random node. So let's check our render here, and I will switch to something more bluish, let's say, like that. Yep. So we'll get this warmer tone a little later, maybe in post-production, but here we have some nice and interesting shading already. And let's check our glossiness. So I believe for both, when we are on a larger area like this, maybe they look too glossy. So for the roof, it's not really a problem because I like the idea, but I may reduce the influence of the glossy shader here on the facing area to 0.05, so that only the border will cast glossiness, and do the same on this one. Reduce the overall value to 0.05, and maybe here 0.15 will be enough. Also, I would like the tiles to be darker, so let me select one here. And I don't really like this greenish influence. And let's darken everything by pushing down our curve pretty smoothly. So let's now shade our wood real quick. That will really give us a better idea of what we are doing.